Narration. Cowboy accidented an Apache slave as payment, didn't know he's taking care of the chief's daughter. Jake Thornton had always been a man of the land. He knew the plains, the hills, and the rivers of the American West like the back of his hand. His ranch, though small compared to some of the bigger ones he had seen in his life, was his pride. It wasn't just a piece of land with horses and cattle. It was a home he had built with his own 2 hands. The weathered wooden fences, the small barn with its creaking doors, and the farmhouse with its smoke curling from the chimney every morning, all spoke of years of hard work, long days, and quiet nights. Money, however, was always a challenge. Crops could fail, cattle could get sick, and sometimes buyers would refuse to pay the prices Jake needed to keep the ranch running. This season, luck had not been on his side. The market was down, and debts were piling up. Jake sat on his porch one evening, watching the sun sink behind the hills, where the orange and red sky painted a picture of beauty that almost made him forget the worry in his chest. Almost. He had heard the creak of wagon wheels on the dirt road before seeing the traveler. The man was tall and lean, wearing a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes. He approached the porch slowly, as if measuring whether Jake was friend or foe. Jake stood, wiping his hands on his shirt, and greeted him. "Evening. What could I do for you?" The man tipped his hat and spoke with a low, calm voice. "Evening, sir. I'm here about the debt you're owed." I have something to offer instead of money." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Something? What do you mean? You owe me coin, not promises." The traveler hesitated, his eyes flicking to the ground. "I don't have money, sir, but I have a person. She can work your ranch, help with the chores, do anything you need."
"In exchange, your debt would be cleared." Jake blinked, taken aback.
He had expected gold coins or maybe cattle, but not a human being. "A person?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Are you saying you want me to take a slave instead of cash?" The man nodded slowly, his face serious. "I swear she is obedient, hardworking. I only ask that you treat her fairly." Jake felt a tight knot in his stomach. He had always considered himself a fair man, someone who treated people with respect, no matter their background. The thought of taking someone as property, someone who had a life and a story of her own, made him uneasy. He could almost feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, heavier than any debt he had ever collected. Breath.
Yet, the man insisted. He was desperate, his voice trembling slightly as he explained that this was the only way to settle the debt.
Jake could see the worry and fear in his eyes, and despite his better judgment, he found himself thinking about the ranch, about the work that had to be done, the animals that needed tending, and the debts that would continue to pile up if he refused. Reluctantly, Jake agreed. "Fine," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'll take her. But understand this, I don't want trouble. I treat everyone fairly here, and I expect the same respect." The traveler nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, sir. Thank you."
"You won't regret it." The next morning, a young girl arrived at the ranch.
She was not much older than 14, her dark eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. Her long black hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her clothes were worn but clean. She stood quietly, clutching a small bundle of belongings, and looked at Jake with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Jake studied her carefully. She moved with a grace that belied her fear, and there was an intelligence in her eyes that he could not ignore. He realized immediately that she was not just any child. She carried herself with a confidence and awareness that came from life in a very different world. "All right," Jake said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm Jake. This is your new home, at least for now. You'll do chores, help with the cattle, and learn the ways of the ranch. You eat with us, sleep in the small cabin by the barn, and I expect honesty and effort. Persist." The girl nodded, her lips pressed together. She did not speak, but her eyes told him that she understood perfectly. Breath. Jake felt a pang of guilt. He had expected a worker, perhaps even someone a little afraid, but not a child with so much strength and dignity. Days passed and Jake began to notice things he had not anticipated. The girl, whose name was Ayana, was not simply obedient. She was careful, thoughtful, and deeply aware of her surroundings. She cleaned the stables thoroughly, fed the animals with care, and even helped mend broken fences without being asked. She worked harder than many adults Jake had known, but she did it quietly, without complaint. Despite her diligence, there was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet that spoke of loss and longing. Jake did not know her story, and he did not ask, yet. He sensed that one day it would come out, and he would need to listen. He had taken responsibility for her, and now he realized that he was not only managing a ranch, but also a young life that depended on him. The other ranch hands noticed too. They were wary at first, unsure what to make of Ayana, but gradually they began to accept her. She was fast and capable, and soon became an essential part of the ranch's daily rhythm. Jake watched her closely, sometimes from a distance, admiring the way she carried herself. She had been given a harsh start in life, yet she held herself with quiet dignity and courage. One evening, after the sun had set and the horses were stabled for the night, Jake sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the wide-open sky. Ayana approached, her steps careful on the wooden planks desk. She held a small bucket of water, and without a word, set it down beside him.
"You work hard," Jake said gently, breaking the silence.
Ayana nodded, still quiet. I know this isn't easy," he continued. "Being here, away from everything you knew. I don't expect you to say much, but I want you to know that I don't mean you any harm." Ayana looked at him, her eyes dark and thoughtful. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a soft voice, she said something that made Jake pause.
"I will do as you ask," she said. "But know this, I am not like others."
"I have responsibilities. And my people." Her voice trailed off. Rasp. Jake sensed there was a story there, one that he could not yet fully understand. But he nodded, respecting her words. He knew that he had entered into something far more complicated than a simple debt repayment. This was not just about work or money. It was about trust, respect, and the weight of a young girl's life. The days turned into weeks, and Jake found himself thinking about Ayana more often than he expected. He noticed the way she watched the horizon, as if searching for something he could not see. He saw her speaking quietly to the animals, as though they were friends she could trust. He realized that this girl, taken in an unusual and troubling way, had a spirit that refused to be broken. Jake began to respect her, even admire her courage. And though he had taken her in as a solution to a problem, he was beginning to understand that she was not a problem at all. She was a person, with a history, a family, and a life that mattered more than any debt. Little did Jake know, Ayana was not just any girl, Bray. She was the daughter of an Apache chief, a young woman with connections and importance that he could not yet comprehend. The decision he had made, the acceptance of her as payment, would have consequences far beyond the ranch. But at this moment, on this quiet evening with the stars above and the plains stretching endlessly around them, Jake Thornton could only take the first step. He could only take responsibility, do his best, and hope that the choices he made would be right. And so life on the ranch continued. The chores were done, the cattle fed, and slowly an unspoken understanding began to grow between the cowboy and the girl. It was fragile, careful and tentative, but it was there. Jake knew that one day he would need to understand her fully, to learn her story, and to face the consequences of his choice. But for now, he did what he had always done. He worked hard, faced each day as it came, and watched over the land and the life that had unexpectedly come into his care. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm, though it was far from ordinary. Jake Thornton continued his daily work, rising with the sun to tend the cattle, mend fences, and care for the land he loved. But now there was Ayanna, the young girl he had reluctantly accepted as payment for a debt. She was quiet, efficient, and surprisingly capable. Every day she woke before dawn, fed the animals, cleaned the barn, and helped wherever she could. Yet, despite her diligence, there was a sadness about her, a quiet sense that she carried a weight no child should bear. Jake watched her closely, trying to understand. He noticed the way she glanced at the horizon every morning as if expecting someone to appear from the endless plains. She was always alert, moving quickly but carefully, never letting herself be caught off guard. Her eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to notice everything. A small bird landing on the fence, a stray cloud drifting across the sky, a horse shifting nervously in the corral. All of it caught her attention.
It was clear she had been taught to survive in a world that demanded vigilance.
At first, Jake had kept a polite distance, unsure of how to interact with Ayanna. He had expected a servant who followed orders without question, someone who worked quietly and spoke only when necessary. But Ayanna was not like that. She had her own thoughts, her own quiet pride. And though she rarely spoke, Jake could sense her intelligence and strength. He realized quickly that commanding her like a worker would not work. She needed respect, not authority, and, slowly, he began to treat her not as a servant, but as a young person under his care. The other ranch hands had mixed reactions. Some were suspicious, unsure what to make of a young Apache girl living on the ranch. Others were curious, watching as Ayanna worked tirelessly and quietly. She earned their respect without speaking a word, simply by being competent and steady. Soon, even the most skeptical hands came to accept her presence. She mended fences better than some adults, fed the animals carefully, and learned quickly to ride the horses without fear. Jake noticed this and felt a mixture of pride and relief. Despite the growing trust, there were moments that reminded him of the complicated nature of their arrangement. Ayanna had arrived as someone taken in a troubling way, and the reality of that weighed heavily on Jake. He knew her people might be looking for her, and he could not be sure how they would react if they discovered she was here. At the same time, he was beginning to care about her, and the thought of harm coming to her troubled him more than any debt or financial worry ever had. One evening, after a long day of work, Jake found himself sitting by the barn, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Ayanna approached quietly, carrying a small bundle of freshly picked herbs she had gathered from the nearby hills. She handed them to Jake without speaking, and he nodded in thanks. "Bah!
You're learning fast," he said gently. "Faster than I expected." Ayanna looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the fading sunlight.
She did not smile, but there was a softness in her gaze that had not been there before. "I have to," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "I cannot afford to make mistakes." Jake nodded, understanding more than she could know. Her life had not been easy, and he could see the strength she carried with her. He realized that he had taken on more than a helper for the ranch. He had taken responsibility for a young girl with a life full of challenges and a past that he could not yet comprehend. The days passed, and slowly, a connection began to form. It was subtle at first, a shared look here, a quiet word there, but it was there nonetheless. Ayanna began to speak a little more, sharing small details about her life in the hills, the animals she had known, and the people she had left behind. Jake listened carefully, never interrupting, realizing that trust had to be earned, not demanded.
He also began to notice her curiosity. Ayanna asked questions about the ranch, about the animals, and about the world beyond the plains. She wanted to know why things were done a certain way, how the fences were built, and why the horses behaved as they did. Jake found himself enjoying her questions, realizing that her curiosity was not just for survival. It was a sign of intelligence and thoughtfulness that he respected. But life on the ranch was not without its challenges. The plains could be harsh and unpredictable, and Jake knew that danger could appear at any moment. Wolves occasionally wandered close to the livestock, storms could sweep in without warning, and sickness could strike both animals and humans alike. Ayanna, despite her strength and skill, was still young, and Jake felt a constant tension as he tried to balance teaching her survival skills while protecting her from harm. One morning, a violent storm rolled in from the west. The sky turned dark, clouds swirling like angry spirits. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the farmhouse and bending the trees. Jake rushed outside, checking the animals in the corral, while Ayanna worked quickly to secure the barn doors. They moved as a team, their movements precise and coordinated, but the storm was relentless. Rain pelted down, soaking them to the bone, and the wind threatened to throw the smaller structures around the ranch. Through it all, Jake noticed how calm Ayanna remained. She did not panic or cry out. She simply did what needed to be done.
He realized that her composure in the storm was extraordinary, a combination of courage, training, and necessity.
She had faced hardships before, and it showed in the way she approached the chaos around them. After the storm passed, the ranch was a mess. Fences had been knocked down, the barn door was damaged, and some of the animals were frightened. Jake and Ayanna worked side by side to repair the damage. As they hammered nails and tied broken boards, Jake finally allowed himself to speak about what had been on his mind for weeks. "You're brave," he said quietly, not looking at her directly. "Braver than most adults I know. I don't know what you've been through, but I see it in the way you move, in the way you work, in the way you face the world." Psst. Ayanna paused, her hand still on the hammer. She looked at him for the first time without hesitation. "I've had to be," she said simply. "There was no other choice." Jake felt a pang in his chest. He wanted to ask more, to understand her past, but he also knew that she would only share what she was ready to share. Respecting her silence was part of caring for her. He nodded, giving her space, and they returned to the work at hand. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened. Jake began teaching Ayanna not only the practical skills of ranch life, but also the subtler lessons: how to read the weather, how to notice small changes in the animals, and how to anticipate problems before they became serious. Ayanna absorbed the lessons quickly, often surprising Jake with her insights and quick thinking. At night, they would sometimes sit together by the fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the cool night air. Ayanna would speak quietly about her dreams and hopes, and Jake would listen, offering advice when asked, but mostly just keeping her company. There was a growing sense of mutual respect and understanding between them, a recognition that each was learning from the other. Despite the peace on the ranch, Jake could not shake the feeling that something was coming. He knew that Ayanna's people might be searching for her, that the Apache tribe was powerful and vigilant. He worried about the day they might arrive, about how Ayanna would react, and about what that would mean for both of them. But he also knew that worrying would not change anything. He could only continue to care for her, to treat her with respect, and to prepare for whatever might come. Ayanna, too, was aware of the tension. She was grateful for the care and protection Jake provided, but she also felt a pull toward her family and her people. She had responsibilities, connections, and a life that could not be ignored forever. The days on the ranch were safe, but they were not the life she truly belonged to. As the sun rose and set each day, the ranch continued its routine. Cattle were fed, fences were mended, and chores were completed. Jake and Ayana worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. Yet beneath the surface, both of them knew that the quiet peace of the ranch was fragile, that the outside world could intrude at any moment. And so, life went on, full of work, small joys, and moments of quiet connection. Jake learned to see Ayana not as a burden or a debt, but as a young person with strength, courage, and intelligence beyond her years. Ayana, in turn, began to trust Jake, to see him not just as a captor or a stranger, but as someone who genuinely cared for her well-being. Unbeknownst to them both, their growing bond was being watched from afar. The Apache tribe, aware that their chief's daughter was missing, had not forgotten her. They were tracking, planning, and waiting for the right moment to act. The day would come when the two worlds, the world of the ranch and the world of the Apache, would meet, and both Jake and Ayana would be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. But for now, there was work to do, lessons to learn, and trust to build. And on the quiet plains, with the wind blowing through the grass and the stars shining overhead, a young cowboy and a girl far from home began a journey that would change both of their lives forever. Life on the ranch had settled into a steady rhythm, but it was far from ordinary. Jake Thornton had grown accustomed to the quiet mornings, the sound of horses neighing in the corral, and the low hum of wind through the grass. But beneath the calm, a sense of tension lingered. He knew that Ayana, the girl he had taken in as payment for a debt, was no ordinary child. Her quiet intelligence and strength hinted at a background far beyond anything he had encountered before. And he could feel, even if he did not fully understand it yet, that the world she came from might not let her remain here for long.
Ayana herself had begun to feel the dual pull of two worlds.
On one hand, the ranch was a place of safety, a place where she could rest, eat, and perform her tasks without fear of immediate harm. Jake, despite the unusual circumstances of her arrival, had treated her fairly and with care. He had not punished her unfairly, and he had respected her boundaries. Slowly, she began to trust him, to recognize that he was different from many of the strangers she had encountered in her young life. But the pull of her people, the Apache tribe, remained strong. She could not forget the lessons her father had taught her, the stories of her tribe, and the responsibilities she would one day carry. Each night, when the ranch lay quiet and the wind swept across the plains, she would look toward the distant hills, wondering when someone would come for her. She missed her home, her family, and the familiarity of the land she had known since childhood. Perhaps, despite this inner conflict, she threw herself into her work. She was careful, efficient, and precise in everything she did, from tending the horses to feeding the cattle. Breaths. Jake began to notice how intuitive she was, how she seemed to anticipate problems before they happened.
A fence that might have needed repair tomorrow would already be fixed today.
A sick calf was spotted before its condition could worsen. Even the other ranch hands began to notice and respect her abilities. One afternoon, Jake called her over as she was leading a horse back to the stable. "Ayana," he said, "I want you to ride Shadow over to the creek. Check the fences there. The north corral might need fixing." Ayana nodded without hesitation. "I'll go right now," she replied. Her voice was calm and certain, revealing a confidence that came from experience and necessity. Jake watched her ride off, her posture perfect and her movements fluid. She looked natural on the horse, at ease even on the uneven terrain. He could not help but be impressed. She was learning quickly, but more importantly, she had the instincts and awareness of someone who had grown up close to nature and danger. As the days passed, Jake noticed subtle changes in Ayana. She began to speak more openly, sharing small stories of her life in the hills, the animals she had known, and the traditions of her people.
At first, Jake listened quietly, not pressing for details.
But gradually, he became more curious. He wanted to understand her world, to see the life she had left behind, even if he knew he might never fully comprehend it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake and Ayana were repairing a section of the corral fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. Jake handed her a hammer and nails, and they worked side by side, their movements synchronized.
You know, Jake said, breaking the comfortable silence, I've been around a lot of people in my time.
I've never met anyone quite like you. Ayana paused, looking at him carefully.
Is that a good thing? She asked, her voice calm but curious. Jake smiled faintly.
It is. You're smart, capable, and brave. You notice things that others wouldn't. You think ahead.
That's rare, especially in someone your age.
Ayana's eyes flicked away, her hands still working. I had to be, she said softly. Life didn't leave me a choice. Jake felt a pang of sympathy. He had suspected as much from the beginning, but hearing it confirmed made him realize the depth of her experience. She had been through more than most children, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity and strength. The bond between them continued to grow. They began to share more moments beyond chores and work. Indesperate. Jake would teach her about the practical knowledge of the ranch, how to read the sky for signs of weather, how to notice changes in the herd, and how to handle emergencies calmly. Ayana absorbed everything with sharp attention, often surprising Jake with her quick thinking and insights.
One afternoon, as they were moving cattle to a new pasture, a young calf stumbled and twisted its leg. Ayana was the first to notice. She ran to the calf, gently but firmly holding it in place while Jake tended to the injury.
It's all right, she whispered to the frightened animal, her voice soft but steady. We'll fix you. Jake watched her, amazed at her calm demeanor. You've got a gift with animals, he said, his voice filled with admiration. They trust you, even when scared. Ayana looked at him and shrugged slightly.
They can feel fear and kindness. I've learned both.
As the weeks went on, their daily routines became more than work. They became lessons in understanding, respect, and trust. Jake began to see Ayana not just as someone he had taken in, but as a person with her own history, thoughts, and feelings.
And Ayana, though still wary of the outside world, began to see Jake as more than just a captor. She recognized his fairness, his patience, and his genuine concern for her well-being.
Breath.
Yet, tension lingered beneath the surface. Both Jake and Ayana were aware that her people might be searching for her.
The Apache tribe had long eyes and sharp instincts. They would notice if a child went missing, and Ayana knew that the longer she stayed, the more urgent the search would become. Breaths. Each time she looked at the distant hills, she wondered how long it would be before someone arrived. Jake, too, sensed it. He had dealt with strangers in danger before, but he knew that the Apache were skilled trackers and that any encounter could be serious. He worried not just for himself, but for Ayana. She had come into his care, and he felt responsible for her safety. He thought about how he would handle the situation if they appeared, whether he would try to defend the ranch, negotiate, or step aside. Despite the looming tension, life continued. They faced small challenges, the occasional storm, a sick animal, or a stubborn fence, and overcame them together. Each obstacle strengthened their bond. Jake began to feel something he had not expected, a deep respect, and perhaps even a sense of affection for the young girl who had come into his life in such an unusual way. One evening, after a long day, they sat by the fire in the small cabin near the barn. Ayana had prepared some herbs she had gathered from the hills, explaining their uses for minor ailments. Jake listened carefully, impressed by her knowledge. "You've learned a lot from your people," he said. Ayana nodded. We have to know things, she said simply.
It's how we survive. My father always says that knowledge is a weapon as strong as any bow or spear. Jake nodded, understanding more clearly the depth of her upbringing.
She had been raised to face challenges, to think ahead, and to value life in all its forms. He realized that her presence on the ranch was teaching him lessons as well, not just about survival, but about patience, respect, and the strength of the human spirit. But as the night grew quiet and the fire burned low, a shadow of worry fell over both of them. They knew that their peaceful days were temporary. The world outside the ranch, the one Ayanna belonged to, was still moving, still searching, still waiting. And when that world arrived, they would be forced to confront it. For now, however, they worked, learned, and shared small moments of connection. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities to understand each other. They had built a fragile peace, a routine of cooperation and trust. But beneath it all, the knowledge of what might come. The arrival of the Apache tribe hung like a quiet storm on the horizon. And so life continued on the ranch. Horses were tended, fences repaired, and chores completed with care. Jake and Ayanna faced each day together, their partnership growing stronger. They both knew that one day the outside world would reach them, but for now they focused on what they could control. The work at hand, the lessons learned, and the fragile trust that had begun to blossom between them. The sun rose and set over the plains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and orange. And through it all, Jake and Ayanna learned to navigate their unusual circumstances, discovering courage, patience, and understanding in the process. It was a time of growth, preparation, and quiet anticipation. And unbeknownst to them, the day of reckoning, the day when her people would come, was drawing closer with every passing moment. The peaceful days on the ranch could not last forever. Jake Thornton had known it in his heart, even as he worked alongside Ayanna and watched her grow stronger, more confident, and more capable. He could feel it, the pull of her people, the distant watchful eyes of the Apache tribe, and the inevitable reckoning that would come. But even with that knowledge, he hoped that the bond he had built with her would somehow protect them both. It began subtly at first. Ayanna would sometimes pause mid-task, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. The slightest shift in the wind or movement in the grass would catch her attention, and she would stand still, listening intently. Jake noticed her growing alertness, and understood that she was sensing something he could not. He tried not to worry, telling himself that perhaps it was only her natural caution. But deep down, he knew better. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Jake and Ayanna were mending a section of fence near the northern pasture. A cool breeze rustled the tall grass, carrying with it an unfamiliar scent. Ayanna froze mid-step, her hand resting lightly on the wooden post she had been painting. "Something wrong?" Jake asked, noticing her sudden stillness. Ayanna shook her head slightly. "I smell them," she said softly, her voice tense. "Not far from here."
They're coming! Jake's stomach tightened.
He had anticipated this moment, but hearing it confirmed by Ayanna's keen senses sent a surge of adrenaline through him.
"Who?" he asked, though he already knew the answer.
"The Apache," she replied. "They've tracked me. They must have known where I was taken." Jake nodded, his mind racing. He knew he had to act quickly to protect her, but he also knew that confrontation could be dangerous. The Apache were skilled warriors, fierce and determined. If they came for Ayanna, he could not fight them off easily. Yet he could not let harm come to her either. He motioned for Ayanna to follow him toward the farmhouse. "Come on, we need to prepare, Brave. Stay calm. Don't panic." Ayanna followed, her movements careful and deliberate. She was not afraid, not of the approaching warriors, at least not outwardly. But Jake could see the tension in her posture, the sharpness of her gaze as she scanned the horizon. She knew this was coming, and she was ready in her own way. Inside the farmhouse, Jake moved quickly to secure the doors and windows. He called the ranch hands together, explaining the situation quietly but firmly. "We're not sure how many there are, but they're here for Ayana," he said. "Stay calm. Do exactly as I say, and no one gets hurt."
The ranch hands exchanged worried glances, but they trusted Jake.
He had led them through storms, cattle stampedes, and harsh winters. They knew he could handle this as well. Outside, the sound of hooves grew louder. Shadows moved along the ridge of the hills, and Jake could make out the figures of several riders. Their movements were precise and coordinated, their presence unmistakably that of trained warriors. The Apache had come, and there was no turning back. Jake stepped to the door, trying to prepare himself for what was coming. He could see the determination in their eyes, the readiness for confrontation. He knew that fighting them outright would be reckless. He would risk not only his life but Ayana's as well. Instead, he hoped to find a way to show them that she was safe and unharmed. Ayana stood beside him, her calm demeanor striking. She had expected this moment, and though her heart might have raced beneath her chest, she showed no outward fear. Despite, Jake realized that she had inherited her father's courage and composure. He nodded to her, silently signaling that they would face this together. Inspiration. The Apache riders approached the ranch slowly, their eyes scanning the property with care. As they drew closer, Jake stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace.
One of the riders, a man with a commanding presence, rode forward to meet him. "I am Jake Thornton," he called out, his voice steady.
"This girl is under my care. She is safe."
"I mean no harm." The rider studied him carefully, then spoke in a low, measured tone. "She is our chief's daughter."
"She has been taken. We will not leave without her." Jake took a deep breath, knowing that words alone would not resolve the situation. He needed Ayana to speak for herself, to show them that she was safe and that he had treated her well. He turned to her, giving her a reassuring nod. Ayana stepped forward, her posture straight, her eyes meeting those of the approaching riders. Breaths. "I am safe," she said, her voice clear and firm. "This man has cared for me. He has not harmed me. I have been treated with respect." For a moment, silence fell across the plain. The Apache riders exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Then, slowly, their leader spoke again. "We will see for ourselves," he said. Jake watched tensely as Ayana walked forward to meet them. She spoke calmly, explaining her time on the ranch, how she had been treated, and how Jake had ensured her safety. She spoke not as a frightened child, but as a young person with intelligence and dignity. Her words carried weight, and Jake could see the change in the faces of the warriors. After a long pause, the leader finally nodded. "Your care has been honorable," he said. "She has been safe, and for that we are grateful. But she must return with us. Her place is with her people, with her father."
Ayana nodded, showing respect for their decision. She turned to Jake, her eyes filled with gratitude.
"Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Jake felt a surge of emotion. He had grown attached to her, and the thought of parting was painful. But he knew this was right. She belonged with her family, and he had done his best to protect her until this moment. The Apache riders helped Ayana mount one of their horses. She looked back at Jake, giving him a small, brave smile. Then, with a nod from their leader, they began their journey back to the hills, taking her home safely. Jake watched them go, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and sorrow. He had faced the arrival of her people with care and respect, and it had worked. Ayanna was safe, unharmed, and returning to her family. And though he would miss her, he knew he had done right by her. In the days following their departure, life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. The fences needed repair, the animals needed care, and the routines of daily work continued. But Jake was changed. He had learned about trust, courage, and the bonds that could form between people from entirely different worlds. He thought often of Ayanna, hoping she was safe and happy with her family, and feeling a quiet pride in the part he had played in her life. The arrival of the Apache had reminded him of the larger world beyond the ranch, a world of culture, responsibility, and honor that he had only glimpsed through Ayanna. It had been a lesson in humility and respect, one that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And somewhere in the hills, Ayanna rode with her people, her heart full of gratitude for the man who had treated her with care and respect, even in the most unusual and difficult of circumstances. Browned. She knew that the lessons she had learned on the ranch of kindness, patience, and understanding would stay with her forever. For Jake, the experience marked a turning point. He had entered the situation with doubt and hesitation, unsure of how to care for a child taken in such an unusual way. But through patience, respect, and understanding, he had earned her trust, ensured her safety, and faced a challenge that had tested both his courage and his compassion. Life on the ranch continued, but the memory of Ayanna and the arrival of her people lingered. Jake found himself thinking differently about the world, about responsibility, and about the importance of treating every person with dignity. He knew that life could change in an instant, that circumstances could bring the unexpected into one's path, and that it was how one responded to those challenges that defined character. And though Ayanna was gone, the lessons they had shared remained. Jake continued his work on the ranch, mindful of the world around him, and carrying with him the quiet knowledge that he had done right by someone who needed care, protection, and respect. The plains stretched out endlessly, the wind whispering through the grass, carrying with it the memory of a young girl who had changed his life forever. And in that endless horizon, Jake felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had faced the challenge with honor, compassion, and courage, and that Ayanna was safe with her family, as she belonged. The days after Ayanna returned to her people were quiet on the ranch, quieter than Jake Thornton had ever known. For the first time in weeks, he woke without the sound of hooves and the soft shuffle of Ayanna moving through the barn. The morning air was calm, the birds singing their familiar songs, yet an emptiness lingered where she once had been. Jake had grown used to her presence, her quiet strength, her careful attention to the horses, her sharp eyes noticing every detail of the ranch. Brace. And now she was gone. He walked through the corral, running his hands along the worn wooden fences they had repaired together. Each post and board reminded him of the hours they had spent side by side, of the teamwork that had grown between them. He remembered how she had taught him patience, how her careful movements had shown him that strength could come in quiet forms, and how her intelligence had helped him anticipate problems he might have missed. Jake realized that he had learned far more from Ayanna than she could have learned from him. He had come into the situation thinking she was simply a helper, perhaps a burden. But he had discovered that she had a wisdom beyond her years. She had reminded him that every person carries a story, a strength, and an inner dignity that demands respect. The ranch hands noticed the change as well. They had grown fond of Ayanna, too, admiring her diligence and quiet courage. When they worked alongside Jake, they spoke of her in hushed tones, remembering how she had handled challenges, from storms to sick animals, with calm precision. They respected her for her skill and intelligence, and they respected Jake for the care he had taken in looking after her. Jake returned to his daily routine, tending the animals, mending fences, and preparing for the next season.
Yet every now and then he would pause, gazing toward the distant hills where Ayanna had come from.
He wondered how she was doing, whether she was happy, and whether she remembered the lessons they had shared. He hoped she knew that she had made a lasting impression on him, that her courage and strength had changed the way he saw the world. Life on the ranch moved forward, but Jake found himself thinking more deeply about responsibility. He had entered the situation expecting a simple transaction, taking someone in as payment for a debt, but he had gained far more than he had imagined. He had gained understanding, compassion, and a reminder of the value of human life. The experience had taught him that even in the harshest circumstances, people could show kindness, courage, and loyalty. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Jake found himself walking to the barn, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. The memory of Ayanna handling the horses with care, speaking calmly to frightened animals, and moving through the world with awareness and respect came to mind. He realized that her presence had not only helped him manage the ranch, but had also changed him as a person. Breath. He thought about the day the Apache had arrived, the moment of tension when he feared for both his and Ayanna's safety. He remembered her calm voice, her dignity, and the way she had spoken with honesty and courage. Breath. She had not only defended herself with words, but had also shown him that true strength came from understanding, respect, and trust. He realized that he had witnessed something remarkable, a young girl teaching a man lessons about life, compassion, and honor. The memory of Ayanna's smile as she prepared to return to her people remained vivid in his mind. Breath. She had shown gratitude, courage, and grace, all in a few quiet moments. Jake knew that this farewell was not a loss but a lesson, a chance to see the world from a new perspective, to understand the importance of integrity, and to recognize that doing what is right sometimes requires humility and patience. As the days turned into weeks, Jake began to notice small changes in himself. He treated the animals with even greater care, paying closer attention to their needs. He listened more attentively to the ranch hands, considering their ideas and valuing their input. He approached challenges with a renewed sense of patience, remembering how Ayanna had faced obstacles calmly and thoughtfully. But her presence, though gone, had left a lasting mark on him and the ranch. Jake also reflected on the idea of family and connection. Though Ayanna had not been related by blood, their time together had created a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. He realized that family could be formed in many ways, not only through birth or bloodlines, but also through care, support, and mutual understanding. This lesson stayed with him, influencing how he interacted with the people around him and the land he had dedicated his life to. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the northern pasture, Jake paused to watch the horizon. The hills where Ayanna had grown up looked peaceful, yet he knew the Apache were vigilant, always watchful, and always connected to the land. He imagined her riding with her family, her heart full of pride and gratitude for the lessons she had learned on the ranch. He hoped she carried with her the knowledge that she had been respected, valued, and treated with kindness. The ranch itself seemed to carry the memory of her presence. The fences they had repaired together, the barn where she had worked tirelessly, and the small cabin near the barn all held traces of her time there. Every task, every moment, every small act of care she had shown lingered in the rhythm of ranch life. Jake found comfort in these memories, understanding that though she was gone, the lessons she had imparted remained. Jake also reflected on the broader lesson of empathy. He realized that his initial hesitation to accept Ayanna had been based on fear and misunderstanding. He had assumed she was merely a debt payment, someone to work and obey. But he had learned that every person has depth, intelligence, and the right to respect. This understanding changed not only how he saw others, but also how he approached challenges, relationships, and decisions in his own life. He began to teach this perspective to the ranch hands, sharing with them the importance of seeing beyond appearances, of respecting each person's story, and of recognizing the courage and strength that could be found in unexpected places. The ranch became not only a place of work, but a place of learning, understanding, and compassion. As the seasons changed, Jake found peace in the rhythm of life. He tended to the land, cared for the animals, and continued to honor the lessons he had learned from Ayana. He knew that life would always bring challenges, that the unexpected could arrive at any moment. But he also knew that courage, respect, and understanding would guide him through. Occasionally, travelers would pass by the ranch, and Jake would share stories of the plains, the animals, and the lessons learned from the land. Without revealing too much, he would sometimes tell the story of a remarkable young girl who had taught him about strength, courage, and respect. Travelers listened with fascination, often taking away lessons of their own. And though he never saw Ayana again, Jake often thought of her, wondering how she was faring with her family, what new lessons she was learning, and how her life was unfolding. He hoped she was happy, safe, and thriving, carrying with her the knowledge that she had touched his life in a profound way.
In quiet moments, Jake would look out over the plains, imagining the wind carrying messages across the hills.
Perhaps Ayana was riding with her people, her spirit as strong as ever, remembering the time spent on the ranch and the lessons learned. Perhaps she carried a piece of him in her heart as well, a reminder that even in unexpected circumstances, kindness, respect, and courage could make a difference.
Jake Thornton's life on the ranch continued, full of work, challenges, and quiet moments of reflection.
He had entered the situation uncertain, hesitant, and cautious. He had taken in a girl as payment for a debt, unsure of what he was doing or whether it was the right choice. But through patience, care, and respect, he had built trust, protected her, and witnessed courage and dignity beyond his expectations. The experience had changed him forever. He had learned about empathy, the value of every life, and the importance of treating others with kindness and respect. He had learned that strength is not always loud or aggressive. It can be quiet, thoughtful, and steadfast. He had learned that trust and understanding can bridge worlds, even those divided by culture, circumstance, or distance. And so, life continued on the ranch. The wind swept through the plains. The sun rose and set over the hills, and the work went on. But in the quiet of the evening, when the light was soft and the animals rested, Jake would remember Ayana. He would remember her courage, her intelligence, and her quiet strength. And he would carry with him the knowledge that sometimes the most unexpected events can teach the greatest lessons, and that the bonds formed through care, respect, and understanding can last a lifetime, even when parting is inevitable. Jake Thornton had begun the journey thinking he was merely taking responsibility for a girl, but he ended it with something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of humanity, the strength of trust, and the knowledge that even in a harsh and unpredictable world, kindness and courage can make all the difference. And somewhere, far across the hills, Ayana thrived with her family, carrying with her the lessons, the trust, and the care that had been given to her on a small ranch in the American West, a testament to the enduring power of respect, compassion, and courage in the lives of those who truly see each other.